Welcome back, everyone. If you're just joining us, make sure you go back and watch part 1 first so you understand how we got to this point. When we left off, we were talking about the Battle of the Somme and the horrific trench warfare that defined World War I. Now we're going to explore the weapons that made this war so deadly, how the conflict spread around the globe, and ultimately, how it all ended. Let's jump right back in. World War I introduced weapons that seemed designed by people who wanted to create hell on earth. Poison gas was first used effectively by the Germans at the Second Battle of Ypres in April 1915. They released chlorine gas from cylinders, and it drifted over French colonial troops, who panicked and fled, leaving a gap in the Allied lines. Chlorine gas burns the lungs and causes you to essentially drown in your own fluids. It's an agonizing death. Both sides quickly started using poison gas. They developed more toxic agents like phosgene and mustard gas. Mustard gas was particularly nasty because it caused severe blistering on any exposed skin and in the lungs. It didn't kill quickly but caused long-term damage, blinding soldiers and leaving them with permanent respiratory problems. Gas masks became essential equipment, but early masks were primitive and not always effective. The psychological impact of gas attacks was enormous. You couldn't see the gas coming, and you had only seconds to get your mask on when you heard the alarm. Flamethrowers were another horrific innovation. German troops first used them in 1915. They shot streams of burning fuel up to 40 meters, incinerating anyone caught in the flames. They were incredibly effective at clearing trenches and bunkers, but also terrible weapons to carry because if you were hit while carrying a flamethrower, you basically became a human torch. Tanks made their debut at the Battle of the Somme. The British developed these armored vehicles that could cross trenches, crush barbed wire, and protect soldiers from machine gun fire. Early tanks were slow, unreliable, and broke down constantly. Crew inside was exposed to toxic fumes from the engine and extreme heat. But tanks represented the future of warfare. By 1918, both sides were using tanks more effectively, and they played a significant role in breaking the trench deadlock. Aircraft evolved rapidly during the war. At the start, planes were used just for reconnaissance, flying over enemy lines to observe troop movements. Then pilots started taking pistols and rifles up to shoot at enemy planes. Soon, they were mounting machine guns on the aircraft. The problem was that the propeller was in the way, so the Germans developed an interrupter gear that synchronized the machine gun to fire between the spinning propeller blades. This led to the era of the fighter ace, pilots who shot down multiple enemy aircraft and became celebrities. Names like the Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen, became famous. He shot down 80 Allied aircraft before being killed in 1918. But being a fighter pilot was incredibly dangerous. New pilots often lasted just a few weeks before being shot down. Planes were made of wood and fabric, and they didn't have parachutes because commanders worried pilots would abandon their expensive aircraft too easily. If your plane caught fire, and they often did, you either rode it down or jumped to your death. The war wasn't confined to Western Europe. On the Eastern Front, Germany and Austria-Hungary fought against Russia. The Eastern Front was more mobile than the Western Front because the distances were so vast that continuous trench lines were impossible. Battles were huge, involving millions of soldiers. Russia had enormous manpower, but suffered from poor leadership, inadequate supplies, and outdated equipment. Russian soldiers sometimes went into battle without rifles, being told to pick them up from fallen comrades. The Germans defeated Russia repeatedly, inflicting millions of casualties. The Battle of Tannenberg in August 1914 saw an entire Russian army destroyed. But Russia kept fighting, kept sending more men. The Eastern Front became a bleeding wound for Russia. Millions of soldiers died, millions more were captured, and the Russian economy collapsed under the strain of supporting the war effort. By 1917, Russian soldiers were mutinying, refusing to fight. The Russian Revolution erupted, first overthrowing the Tsar in March, then bringing the Bolsheviks to power in November. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, promised peace, land, and bread. They signed an armistice with Germany, and then the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in March 1918, giving up huge amounts of territory to get Russia out of the war. This was actually a disaster for the Allies, because it freed up German troops to fight on the Western Front. But it was also the beginning of the end for Germany because they no longer had the resources to win. In the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers in late 1914. The British and their allies fought the Ottomans in several campaigns. The Gallipoli campaign was a British-led attempt to knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war by seizing the Dardanelles Strait and capturing Constantinople. It was a complete disaster. Allied forces landed on the Gallipoli Peninsula in April 1915 and faced fierce Ottoman resistance. The campaign turned into another bloody stalemate, with soldiers fighting from trenches in brutal heat with limited water. Disease killed as many men as combat. The Allies finally evacuated in January 1916, having achieved nothing except hundreds of casualties. The British also fought the Ottomans in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. They wanted to protect oil fields and threaten Ottoman territories. After some initial successes, a British force was besieged at Kut and forced to surrender in 1916, one of Britain's worst defeats. Later, British forces, including a young officer named T.A. Lawrence of Arabia, became famous for his exploits, though the promises Britain made to Arab leaders about independence after the war were contradicted by secret agreements to divide the Middle East with France. At sea, Britain's Royal Navy was larger than Germany's, so the British established a blockade of Germany, trying to starve them into submission. The blockade was incredibly effective, causing severe food shortages in Germany that killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. Germany responded with unrestricted submarine warfare, using U-boats to sink any ship heading to Britain, including neutral vessels and passenger ships. The sinking of the Lusitania in May 1915 killed 1,198 people, including 128 Americans. It caused outrage in the United States, but America remained neutral. President Woodrow Wilson won re-election in 1916 on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." But Germany's submarine campaign made American neutrality increasingly difficult to maintain. In January 1917, British intelligence intercepted and decoded a telegram from German Foreign Minister Arthur Zimmermann to the German ambassador in Mexico. The telegram proposed that if the United States entered the war, Mexico should ally with Germany and attack the United States. In return, Germany would help Mexico recover Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. When this telegram was published in American newspapers, public opinion shifted dramatically. Combined with Germany's resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare, it pushed America into the war. The United States declared war on Germany in April 1917. American entry was a game changer. The U.S. had a huge economy, massive industrial capacity, and a large population. American forces started arriving in France in significant numbers by early 1918. These were fresh troops who hadn't been ground down by years of trench warfare. Their arrival boosted Allied morale and gave the Allies the manpower advantage they needed. But 1917 was a terrible year for the Allies. The French army launched a massive offensive in April 1917 that was supposed to win the war. Instead, it was another bloodbath that gained almost nothing. French soldiers began mutinying, refusing to participate in more suicidal attacks. The mutinies were kept secret and eventually suppressed, but they showed how close the French army was to collapse. In Russia, the revolutions of 1917 knocked Russia out of the war, as I mentioned earlier. Italy, which had joined the Allies in 1915, suffered a catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Caporetto in October 1917, with hundreds of soldiers killed, wounded, or captured. It looked like the Central Powers might actually win. Germany decided to make one last gamble. With Russia out of the war, and before American forces arrived in full strength, Germany launched the Spring Offensive in March 1918. They threw everything they had at the Western Front, using new stormtrooper tactics that bypassed strong points and pushed deep into Allied lines. For a while, it worked. German forces advanced further than anyone had in years, getting to within 75 miles of Paris. But the offensive exhausted Germany. They suffered hundreds of thousands of casualties they couldn't replace. The Allies bent, but didn't break, and by summer 1918, they counterattacked. This time, the Allies used tanks effectively, combined with aircraft, artillery, and infantry in coordinated assaults. German lines began to collapse. Germany's allies were falling apart too. Bulgaria surrendered in September, the Ottoman Empire in October, and Austria-Hungary in early November. Inside Germany, the situation was desperate. The British blockade had created mass starvation. The Spanish flu pandemic was killing millions worldwide, including many in Germany. The German people were exhausted and demoralized. Sailors in the German Navy mutinied, refusing to make a suicidal attack on the British fleet. Revolution broke out in German cities. Kaiser Wilhelm, I fled to the Netherlands, and a new German government sought an armistice. The armistice was signed on November 11, 1918 at 11 a.m., the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Soldiers on both sides couldn't believe it. After 4 years of hell, the guns finally fell silent. But even in the last hours before the ceasefire, men kept fighting and dying. Some commanders ordered attacks right up until 11 a.m., and men died minutes before the war ended, which seems like the ultimate tragedy. The cost of the war is almost impossible to comprehend. About 17 million people died, roughly split between military and civilian deaths. Another 20 million were wounded. Entire villages in France and Belgium were wiped off the map, so thoroughly destroyed they were never rebuilt. The French village of Fleury, near Verdun, completely disappeared. Today, there's just a memorial where the village used to be. The psychological damage was immense. Millions of veterans suffered from what we now call PTSD. Many were physically disabled, missing limbs or eyes, disfigured by burns or facial wounds. Societies struggled to reintegrate these broken men. The literature and art that came out of the war reflected a profound disillusionment. Writers like Eric, Maria, Remarque, Robert Graves, and Siegfried Sassoon captured the horror and futility of the war in their works. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in June 1919, officially ended the war with Germany. The treaty was incredibly harsh. Germany was forced to accept full responsibility for causing the war in the famous War Guilt Clause. They had to pay massive reparations, give up all their colonies, surrender territory to neighboring countries, and severely limit their military. The German people felt humiliated and betrayed, especially since they had been told their army hadn't actually lost, but had been stabbed in the back by politicians and revolutionaries at home. This resentment would fester and contribute directly to the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. Hitler was a veteran of World War I who used anger over Versailles to gain support. When you study World War II, you realize it's really a continuation of World War I, the second round of a conflict that was never properly resolved. The war destroyed 4 empires: the German, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires all collapsed. New countries were created from their ruins. Poland was recreated after 123 years of not existing. Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and several Baltic states became independent. The Middle East was carved up by Britain and France, creating countries like Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon with borders that made little sense and would cause conflicts for the next century. The war changed society in fundamental ways. Women had taken on jobs in factories and other roles traditionally held by men, and this accelerated the women's suffrage movement. Class structures began breaking down as aristocrats and common soldiers had died side by side in the trenches. Colonial subjects who had fought for their European masters started demanding independence or at least more rights. Warfare itself had changed forever. The cavalry charge was obsolete, replaced by tanks and aircraft. Chemical weapons, though later banned, had been introduced. The concept of total war, where entire economies and populations are mobilized for the war effort, became the norm. The Geneva Conventions were eventually strengthened to try to prevent some of the worst atrocities, though obviously that hasn't stopped wars from being terrible. World War I also gave us the phrase, lost generation, referring to the young men who died and those who survived but were spiritually and psychologically damaged beyond repair. It's estimated that France lost about 27% of men aged 18 to 27. An entire generation of potential leaders, artists, scientists, and fathers was wiped out. And here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. The war facilitated the spread of the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918 and 1919. Troop movements, overcrowded military camps, and weakened populations helped the flu spread globally, killing somewhere between 50 and 100 million people. That's more deaths than the war itself caused. Some historians argue that the war created the perfect conditions for the pandemic to become so deadly. So what can we learn from all this? World War I shows us what happens when nationalism, militarism, and rigid alliance systems combine with poor leadership and failure of diplomacy. It shows us that wars rarely go as planned, and that the people making decisions are often far from the consequences of those decisions. The generals and politicians who ordered men to their deaths weren't the ones dying in the trenches. It demonstrates the danger of propaganda and how populations can be manipulated into supporting even the most destructive policies. And it reminds us that war, especially modern industrial war, is not glorious or noble, but horrific and wasteful. The sad thing is that people called it the war to end all wars, genuinely believing that humanity had learned its lesson. Obviously, we hadn't. Just 21 years later, we'd be doing it all over again, and World War II would make World War I look small by comparison. All right, everyone, that's the story of World War I, the war that shattered the old world and created the modern age through blood and fire. If you made it this far, thank you so much for sticking with me through this deep dive. I know this was heavy, but I think it's crucial that we understand what happened and why it still matters today. The decisions made during and after this war shaped the world we live in now. The conflicts in the Middle East, the rise of authoritarianism in the 20th century, even some of the political divisions we see today, all have roots in World War I. If this video taught you something or gave you a new perspective, please hit that like button. It really helps the algorithm show this content to more people, and I think this is the kind of history everyone should know. Drop a comment below and tell me what aspect of World War I surprised you the most, or if you have family stories from the war that have been passed down. I always love reading your comments and learning from you guys. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hit that notification bell because we've got more incredible historical content coming your way. Next week, we're going to be looking at another fascinating topic that I think you're really going to enjoy. I also want to give a huge thank you to all my Patreon supporters who make this channel possible and allow me to spend the time researching and creating these in-depth videos.